We'll get started in a moment. Just to let you know that one of our residents is filming tonight, and you'll be able to watch that on YouTube. Have any of you had a chance to watch any of the videos of the township meetings?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. How was the call?
Very good.
Good. In the future, we'll have Zoom meetings. So this will make it easier if you're at home, you want to eat dinner, you can just call in. We'll see you as if you're standing here right now. Good evening. It is 7:30, and Tom, you almost ready, or you are? Okay, good. So, just briefly, tonight this will be the last of hearing it for the development. I just wanted to say that thank you to members of the hearing commission. They have done a great job, not just on this recent hearings, but in the past. So please, we want to have respect both to them, and well, in turn, we should be giving respect to you as well. So we want to keep it professional, regardless of your outcome. If you have any questions after the meeting, I'll be here if you want to talk. Otherwise, if you want to reach out to the supervisors, board of supervisors, or to the township manager. Okay? So I'm going to stop at this point. Turn it over to Mr. Hollis.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we've concluded the hearing. The board's had an opportunity to deliberate. Has the board reached a decision on the application for a special exception that was submitted by DR Brook?
Yes.
Do you want to entertain a motion? Do you want me to frame that, or do you want to frame that?
Do you want to frame it?
Okay, so as I understood the direction from the board, that the consideration would be a motion to approve the special exception for multifamily dwellings, subject to 3 conditions. 1, the zoning hearing board is not specifically approving the number or configuration of the proposed multifamily housing proposed by the applicant. If the project moves forward, the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors can address those issues as part of the subdivision land development ordinance. Number 2, the grant is conditioned on compliance with the Honeybrook Township subdivision and land development ordinance. And 3, that the zoning hearing board recommends to the Planning Commission and the supervisors that due consideration is given to provisions of the SALDO, specifically concerning density, traffic, natural resource protection under the SALDO, specifically including section 22.612, which requires a traffic impact study, 22.662, which addresses sewage facilities treatment and disposal, 22.623, that addresses water supply, 22.627, which addresses stormwater management, and 22.629, which addresses landscaping requirements, and again, wetland, waterway protection. So if I prepared a decision that incorporates those provisions, and that's the decision of the board, and we want a motion, a second, and a vote.
I'll make a motion to agree.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so I prepared that decision, and board members can just make 2 copies of it. You guys can just sign that. And then for the members of the audience that participated as parties, I have copies. I think it's like 18 copies or 17 copies of the decision from the board. So if folks want to collect up that copy, that basically gives the addresses findings of fact and conclusions of law that that the applicant demonstrated the burden to meet the requirements for the grant of the special exception under the ordinance, acknowledges the concerns raised by the objectors and raised by public comment, acknowledge those concerns, and then as was referenced in the conditions, imposes the requirement that the project, if it moves forward, that it's the planning commission and the board of supervisors who will determine the configuration, the layout, the density, the number. This decision does not approve any particular number or layout. It's just a use, multifamily housing. So does anybody have any question about the sort of process? Yes, ma'am.
Can you speak in layman's terms?
Well,
I don't quite get what you're saying.
Sure. Well, so the decision was basically that there were 10 requirements under the zoning ordinance that had to be satisfied in order for the board to grant the special exception to allow multi-family housing. There were various plans submitted that showed configurations of open space and 141 or 143 units. The zoning hearing board is not deciding any of those layouts. It's not addressing what ought to be basins, what ought to be open space. It's just simply acknowledging multi-family housing as a use ought to be permitted on that parcel. And then if the applicant chooses to move forward, they'll have to submit a subdivision land development plan that addresses all the requirements, go through the public process with review with the planning commission, county planning, the board of supervisors.
That's the townhome section we're talking about?
That's just the townhome section. That's all this application addressed. Well, not initially, but once they withdrew the variance, all we were dealing with was the townhome issue.
And you're saying that you give them acceptance of rule?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
Are you going to require that they have their wetlands assessment be certified by the Army Corps of Engineers?
That's not a requirement. That's probably a requirement under the subdivision land development ordinance. That specifically requires that wetland resources be addressed as part of the stormwater management plan. So permits will be required from that, from the state, maybe other agencies as well. But again, that's all the purview of the planning commission, the township engineer, whatever other consultants that the township planning commission, the supervisors might utilize. That's as part of and again, the township has a specific ordinance in addition to the SALDO, that's the subdivision land development ordinance, that incorporates a stormwater ordinance. So all of those requirements are not for the zoning hearing board to make determinations on, but the planning commission and the supervisors.
So we would have to ask the planning commission if they're going to require a certified wetlands assessment?
Yes.
Basically, all the concerns that you brought before us were heard by us. Founding by law, they proved their case that all 10 applicants were met. Now, if you want to dispute the law, we can do that later off the camera, which would be fine with me. I have no trouble doing that with anybody in here. We are bound by law. If we would deny them, and they would take it to Chester County Court, there's a lot more to this whole situation than the general public knows. So, everybody who had a complaint here was heard. Now what you need to do, and I don't mind saying this on film, what you need to do is go to the planning commission where it needs to be taken to, and the board of supervisors is where it needs to be taken to. That's who needs to hear this to stop this, not us. And that's the truth. I'm telling you the truth. Under the law is who needs to hear it. So go in mass forces like you did to us and bring friends. Because believe me, I don't want it. I'm saying that on camera. By law, they proved their case to us. That's where we stand. Do you agree, Chip?
Again, there were nine
Requirements.
applicable requirements. The 10 dealt with commercial use. They demonstrated compliance, and again, all the issues that were raised about traffic, density, stormwater, other environmental resource issues, those are all things that get addressed under the subdivision land development ordinance, where the planning commission and the supervisors have the assistance of a professional engineer, somebody who can review details on traffic study, environmental reports, all of that. That's beyond, my opinion is that's beyond the purview of the board specifically to consider that. There was one of the requirements in those applicable conditions for granting the special exception was to comply with the SALDO. So this is basically a belt and suspenders thing. They need to comply with the SALDO. There were specific concerns addressed. The board had some concerns and reservations. But again, it was premature to make a decision that they didn't demonstrate compliance with traffic because they didn't do a traffic study yet, because they're not obligated to. That's part of the SALDO process.
Yes, sir.
So I'm gonna, bear with me. So you said they didn't do a traffic study yet, but traffic was a condition for the special exception. So how did the board talk about and review and come to the decision that it was not going to affect traffic? Because that's exactly what the condition says, that it will not affect traffic. So I'd just like to know from the board how you came to the decision that, okay, this won't affect traffic. So we'll say yes to that exception.
I mean, not to kick the can down the road, but reviewing the decision might provide some guidance on, what the board's analysis was, what the factors and considerations were. There's a requirement to do a traffic study. There's not a requirement to do a traffic study before you get the zoning relief to move forward with doing that kind of detailed study. And again, we didn't approve a plan. The zoning hearing, let me finish. The zoning hearing board members did not approve a plan that shows any specific point of access onto any of the roads, not Chestnut Tree, not Saplee, not 322. They didn't approve a plan. They approved
I agree.
a type of use. If the project moves forward, they're going to have to comply with the traffic study. And all they testified was that we did a preliminary study. We acknowledged we'll have to comply. If they disagree with the conditions that were put in there, I think it would be foolish. But if they did, they have a right to appeal if they think that we overstepped. But again, all the board did was incorporate the requirements from the SALDO and drew specific attention to certain of those points, like traffic, like wetlands.
But again, why is it included in the special exception? Why have any special exceptions then if everything's going to get taken care of down the road? I guess
That's a fair question. But again, when you have a term that says, one of those, and I don't have it in front of me, but one of the conditions was to comply with the subdivision land development ordinance. I mean, if you read that, very strict assessment on that would be, well, then you have to demonstrate compliance with the SALDO, which means they'd have to submit a subdivision land development plan. The zoning hearing board doesn't have an engineer. The supervisors and the planning commission do, and they have to make a determination of what the zoning hearing board's going to hire an expert to review their traffic study. I mean, all of it, those were all, let me just suggest this, and this is some error.
I fully understand. And I guess what I'm saying is the board, you guys had an opportunity of a lifetime that most Americans don't get to affect the lives of your township. And I agree to disagree that there's no way they would have won at Chester County if they would have sued you. Because if you guys, the board, would read those 10 special exceptions, they can't say no. They can't say it's not going to affect traffic. They can't say it's not going to affect natural resources. How are they going to prove it's not? Someone said at the first meeting, when has a development ever gone up that there was less traffic? So you guys had the perfect opportunity to just say no.
I mean, let me.
And then they could have built single-family homes if they wanted to.
Again, let me, I'm frankly,
That's all.
I've gone to a bunch of zoning hearings. I've never engaged in sort of discussion like this, but again, also haven't had this many folks interested in the project. The criteria were not strict, objective criteria, a specific density, or, things like that, where the board could apply a simple yardstick. Frankly, the ordinance ought to be that kind of objective standard, not a subjective standard with, is it in the best interest of, will it impact public health, safety, welfare? To your point about traffic, adding more houses is obviously going to incorporate more cars. But like was discussed, there was a preliminary traffic study done, there was an acknowledgement that they'll have to do things. If there's more cars that are going to degrade the level of service at the various points that are impacted by the project, they'll have to mitigate that. And if that means putting in a light or turn lanes or acceleration, again, all stuff well beyond this board's ability to address.
Agreed,
But
but
again,
it won't stop it. At
But
this
that's-
point, it won't stop it. It'll just, they'll now put up a traffic light.
But what I'm
But it's not
saying
gonna
is,
stop the traffic.
the points that you raised may very well be valid as they relate to the review that's going to be done if this moves forward by the planning commission, by the board of supervisors. There has to be a detailed traffic study. The traffic study is going to require coordination with PennDOT on PennDOT roads, with the township in consultation, and with the township on township roads. And if using all the appropriate standards and requirements, and the same thing with wetlands. There's gonna, if the project moves forward, there's gonna be earthwork that's gonna need to be covered by a permit. There's gonna be stormwater controls and erosion sedimentation control. If there's
Absolutely.
objections to those submissions, there's a process where all those detailed requirements, and again, all we had was like preliminary testimony from the applicant's consultant that we've looked at traffic, and we've looked at wetlands, and we've looked at bog hurdles, and, you know, all of it like a 30,000-foot view overlay. None of it with any great specification or detail, nothing that you could concrete rely on.
So all of our testimony, you mean to think that you just relied on what they said?
Well, it was that.
Because if you would have read my traffic study, it's 40% more traffic. How is that
I
not
understand, but
detrimental?
again, and I don't want to argue with this.
I'm not.
hoping that
Who's going to
this-
do the traffic study if this goes forward? Who does the traffic study?
The applicant does.
They
the
do.
traffic study.
Okay, that's-
And again, you know, it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. What they tried to do, and I'm not an advocate for it, what they tried to do was have somebody describe the process. And so they did an initial or a preliminary study. What they have to do is then contact the agency that controls the road. And then PennDOT says, this is the scope, this is what you need to study. You need to, you know, the peak traffic between this point in time at this intersection. Nobody has any idea how far east or west it goes, north or south on Chestnut Street. All that gets done as part of a scoping by an agency that doesn't even know that this is a project in somebody's mind. So to deny it based on traffic, where the agencies that are going to review that and work through that process don't even know about it, I think would be premature. So again, there was an acknowledgement from the applicant that there's a process they're going to need to go through. They tried to describe it. They tried to describe the wetlands. They tried to do, and again, it was a very preliminary, very cursory analysis, and nobody here is saying that they're right. Nobody here is saying that their preliminary study's right and it's not going to have an impact. What it is an acknowledgement they need to comply with the provisions of the SALDO that deal with traffic, which requires a traffic study, which requires environmental permitting, which requires protection of the resources, you know, all of those things. And again, when an application comes in, the applicant then will have to send off for their MPDS permit, notice will come to the township. Folks independent of the township can contact DEP, EPA, the Army Corps, you know,
We already did
all
that.
those, but they don't have an application yet. If the applicant moves forward, submits an application for a SALDO, and wants to move forward with the project, they're going to have all their permits to comply with the stormwater. They're going to have a highway occupancy permit from PennDOT. They're going to have approval from the township accessing any township road. All of that stuff is in the future. What I'm saying is that those resource agencies, when an application gets issued for that, notice that it has been filed, goes in the PA bulletin, a copy of it comes to the township. Folks can participate with those resource agencies and tell PennDOT, hey, wait, I think you ought to look further. I think the impact is going to back up. Whatever it might be. And I'm not telling you how to kill a project. I'm just saying there's agencies that are involved in the process, and you don't have to tell the township what you want them to tell the agencies. You can tell the agencies. And you can tell the township to tell the agencies. But I'm saying it's a whole public process. So the same effort that you put forward here, you can put forward dealing with PA, DEP, PennDOT, Army Corps, blah, blah, blah. But there's a bunch of people with their hands up.
I have two questions. Is it my understanding that the township supervisors should maybe look at some of their special exemptions and stuff like that, so they don't get in a position with a property like this again?
It would, I mean, again,
And I have a second question, but I'll let you answer the first one.
you know, you're allowed 5 units per acre or 2 units per acre, or, you know, objective criteria, if they were trying to get approval for 141 units, the board was not comfortable approving any number of units. So they showed a concept plan, they revised the concept plan, they showed open space. Nobody on the board is making a recommendation
Right, but if,
about any of that.
if it was part of the land development thing, you know, maybe they could only do like half of it or something like that.
Right.
With that number.
Right.
The other question, can the citizens appeal this decision?
Anybody who was a party, was granted party status, can file an appeal of the decision
To the county?
to the county.
Okay, thanks.
Now, and again, I'm not going to give you any legal advice, but you got to
I
get a copy of the
understand.
transcript, you know, you've got to establish what the legal standards are. What I would like is again, we have like 17 copies here. If there's folks who were a party, who want to get a copy of that, if I could get you to just, you know, print your name, that you got a copy of it. It's not signed, but I didn't get the signed copies back. Okay. So, it's, you know, it's dated today, and it's signed by me. I could only signature.
I mean, that's the whole, not just that. We were bound. We didn't see it. That's the front, that's where
Basically, he's saying they can't turn it down. It has to go into the zoning and then the super. Because they bet on all the stipulations and
I don't have the date, I don't have it signed.
They couldn't take their zoning board, put planning commission in. Blonde vote. Blonde vote.
You get it from your wife.
Still getting old. 68, 3 weeks. Almost should be you.
It's called the
I got one more question and I'll be quiet, I promise. I promise. So, if I kind of heard correctly, you all kind of said you were against this, but. So, my question is, I don't understand. If you're all against it, say no and let them fight it in Chester County and we'd all be there to back you up.
The concern is that, again, it was subjective criteria. They provided testimony about, we're going to meet these requirements. We're going to do traffic. We're going to do. So they met like a prima facie, preliminary, you know, they met a standard by saying that we're going to do the things. If they hadn't paid any attention to the 9 or 10 requirements, like I keep saying, it's 10. One of them was about commercial parking.
Got it.
If they had not testified anything about that, then they wouldn't have said, we're going to address traffic, we're going to have public water, we're going to have public sewer. These are all things the SALDO require. If they hadn't said, we're going to do it, now I understand again, everybody has concern about, you know, but but they don't have a traffic study. Well, they don't have a traffic study because, again, they haven't submitted anything to the township for the township to say, okay,
You could require a traffic study, you know that.
I don't believe they could.
Other townships require traffic studies in their special exceptions now.
The issue is that, and this again, like, the supervisors can amend the zoning ordinance and can say, you know, you're allowed this many units per acre, you're allowed this height, you gotta have this setback, you've gotta have parking 4 to 1, 2 to 1, 1.75 to 1. You have to have a traffic study to start. You have to have, and again, if they, that's what I'm saying, again, if you take every one of those things and say they have to prove it up front, then I have a problem with the language that says you gotta comply with the SALDO. Well, you have to comply with the SALDO like going forward, not you have to have your zoning application complies with the SALDO, because how are we supposed to judge?
We get that.
SALDO?
You realize we're not trying to stop development there. We realize, why, and I was gonna ask them the question, because I didn't want to, because it boils down to just them lying. Why didn't they just build single-family homes? Why build townhomes? It's single-family homes that I think we couldn't fight.
Well, you still can review it, and, because it still has to comply with the SALDO.
Believe it or not, it's a done deal. Once you guys pass the zoning, now they're gonna build these. Don't, you keep saying, I'm not trying to get hot. You keep saying if they do it. They're gonna do it. It's just a matter now of only building 120 townhomes instead of 140 and putting up 3 traffic lights instead of 2 traffic lights. Because you guys could have stopped it. You could have stopped it.
I'll tell you for a fact, this is a fact. What we did with putting amendments on this and sending it back to the supervisors helped you and the township, general public, way more than not approving it, throwing shit on the wall, taking it down to Chester County Courthouse, letting the judge go through it and say, well, they met all 10 applications, go for it, boys. And that's exactly what's going to happen.
But there's,
But then it would have still had to go through, again, back to what they're gonna do now.
Right, but
But it could have, the judge could have said no.
when Chester County Court reviewed it and said they met all 10 legal obligations, they could have went right on in, put the 143 homes up, without the supervisors blocking anything, without the planning commission blocking anything. They'd have had an open gateway to do whatever they wanted. With us putting stipulations on it,
Put the brakes on.
we stopped by doing.
They could skip the planning commission if the judge agreed. No, I didn't think so. They can't skip that.
And again,
They can, but they'd have a lot better chance of doing what they wanted.
But
purpose
the only
of
thing-
trying to pull those portions out of the SALDO is the public, you included, had various points made, concerns about things.
I
They
understand.
presented that preliminary traffic
We
study.
get it.
That preliminary traffic study, frankly, the paper wasn't worth anything.
because it was
The
320.
guys who offered testimony about it, all it was an acknowledgement that there's a process and we'll go through it. The same thing with coming in with, with their wetland study. It wasn't submitted to DEP, it wasn't approved, it's not, things need to be, the time they hold it. There's nothing in the SALDO that says you have to have DEP approved bog turtle study, and you have to have, if those objective criteria were set out in there in the 1 through 10, that you gotta have a traffic study, submitted and approved, and you have to have a wetlands report delineation approved, and you have to have, then the board would have had to require compliance as opposed to testimony about we will comply. If the ordinance said you must comply now, and I'm just saying, I could not read the ordinance when it had provisions about, that it's in the best interest of the public, health, welfare, and safety. I don't know that there's anything that, like, objections about there's gonna be more traffic. We didn't have something that concrete says there's gonna be a problem. We had an applicant, we had people concerned about it, and we had an applicant saying there's a process and we'll comply with it. I don't think that was a basis for us to deny it. Just as an example, just picking one thing. That's really what the issue is, and the whole point of having the decision go on and describe the various concerns that were pointed out and the requirements in the process was that folks understand that nobody's turning a blind eye to something, it's just premature. So bring the same issues back. Nobody was at my understanding, I wasn't there, nobody was at the planning commission when the planning commission reviewed this and then had a letter recommending.
Nobody knew about it.
Nobody knew.
But what I'm saying is that there's a process.
We
Now
didn't
you
know
about it.
that. We had nobody
So you
knew they were taking it to the planning
But
commission.
now that agendas are published online, folks will know, and so the same concern, you look at the traffic study, you know, I don't think that scope is right, raise the issue, or understand clearly what, you know, what they're looking at. We're doing traffic counts, we're doing it from this point to this point, this is where we're looking, and it's gonna degrade service, people are gonna wait longer at Chestnut Street. Well, how are you gonna mitigate that? Well, we're gonna, a light, or this, or a turn lane, or something, and if they don't mitigate, they're not allowed to degrade service on a PennDOT road. No matter how many more cars you add, you have to come up with an engineering solution for it. And if that's making, you know, a right hand, two go straight, one, you know, instead of a 2-lane road, that's what they need to do.
But then you're taking somebody else's property at the,
But again, they can't take somebody else's, I don't, again, I never got into this kind of question and answer kind of thing. They can't take somebody else's property. The township could, or PennDOT could, if they can't do it because people won't give them what they need for the acceleration, deceleration lane, that's a way to kill a project. A private developer can't
no,
just
no,
go
I mean,
condemn
tell me more
somebody's property.
ideas.
I'm saying,
Tell me more ideas, that's what I want to hear.
But again, you've heard all about what's coming. And again, when you say you don't know, what you know it's coming, who saw interest rates doing what they're doing? You know, there were a lot of projects that were approved 08, 9, 10, 12, that, building in the economy fell on its face. So, maybe they do proceed with this. I don't know how long.
Yeah, but then that's like, Ryan Holmes was being built back in 2006, 7, but then it fell, but then it still gets built, it's just.
I'm not disagreeing with any of that. I'm just saying, yes, I would not, if you have concerns, raise them at the appropriate time, right? And so I think that's the way to.
I would like to see it more, in those exceptions, being more exact, specific.
Right.
So that when they come up, you gotta say, no, okay, so you can only build whatever on 3 acres, you know what I mean?
And again,
But be more
you can make a suggestion to the supervisors to amend the ordinance about whatever
That's
provision you
what-
want.
So who do I go to?
Well, the supervisor.
Right there, okay.
But I would suggest you go to a
Now
supervisor.
you're hearing the real Karen coming on now.
Maybe you go
Okay?
to, maybe
You
you go
need to
to.
get there and look at those exceptions and make them more specific.
They will be coming up. I'm not speaking right now because it's the board.
I understand that, but you're sitting here, my God.
Once they're done, then we can talk, okay?
Maybe just 2 other pieces of business while you're here, just so that we can help the staff. So there's copies of minutes that were in a packet from, I think there's copies for each of us. So here's, what we have is if we get motion to approve the minutes for April 11th and April 25. All in favor?
You done?
I have a quick question.
Say one more.
I have a quick question regarding zoning now. Because this variance was approved, does that mean any other developer that comes in and wants to do a townhouse or a duplex automatically can, or do they also have to apply for a variance?
I'm not, I heard you, I'm not sure I followed. Are you talking about on this? There
No,
was
so I'm saying, in general, if another developer comes into the area, buys a piece of property and says, I want to build a townhouse, and it's in a location that this variance is now approved for, do they also have to
The
apply?
special exception was for this
Just
piece
this
of
development?
property, with
So
this
they would have
current
to go through the
zoning.
same process as this development?
For some other property.
And to make the guidelines more strict.
That's something you have to take
That's
to the board
what,
supervisor.
we gotta talk to him, so we're just gonna harass.
Can't say no now to somebody else.
That's the only problem. So with the recommendation that you had provided, when does this go before the planning commission? Because that sounds like the next step.
Well, the applicant controls the timing of when they're going to make a submission, and then there's a clock under the municipality's planning code that the supervisors get a period of time to review it, and if the application is not sufficiently detailed or there's deficiencies, they can grant extensions, the board can consider extensions, but again, the planning commission makes recommendations to the board of supervisors, and that might go several iterations before there's some conclusion.
And that will be published in the township website as to like, hey, there's an application, here's a meeting proposal.
It will surely show up as agenda items when those, when there's review of a plan. I don't know that there's anything on the website that says it's an application.
Specifics, we'll announce the meetings, but probably some of them you have to ask for some of the specifics, but it's not on this, we certainly can get something out there that you need to look at.
So then your meetings don't have topics that's going to be addressed that evening?
Well, they do.
No, yes, we have to publish within 48 hours what will be discussed. And that's the Pennsylvania sunshine law that we have to abide by. So that you have the opportunity to see ahead of time what we're discussing. So you don't walk in here and say, I didn't know we were going to talk about this tonight.
And the planning commission has the same requirement. So there'd be an item that, DR Horton.
And we have the same opportunity to go in front of the planning commission and present our case to them like we did to you, or it's completely different because it's really not a hearing at that point. It's a done deal, we just have to try to mitigate what they can do.
I due respect, I'm not agreeing that it's a done deal. There's a submission comes in, the planning commission is to review it, the planning commission has an engineer who, the township engineer that reviews it, makes recommendations, writes a detailed review letter. From the engineer's perspective, these things are satisfied, these things are deficient, these things need to be addressed, these things are preliminary plan requirements, these things are final plan requirements. And then there's not sworn testimony in a court reporter, there's public comment about the submission, and the board of supervisors set the time, the time period allowed, and it's a sort of a less formal process where you don't necessarily get yelled at because a court reporter can't hear the two.
No, but the question, you didn't understand the question, but the question is, they can't stop it at that point. They have to, DR Horton now only has to abide by what the township ordinances require for townhomes on that piece of property, but there's no chance of stopping this if they want to build it. We can't stop it anymore.
Well, again,
For any reason.
I don't think that's an accurate statement. The issue is, because either that or you're loading it up.
No, I don't mean to be, but I mean, like traffic, we can't stop it for traffic. DR Horton will just put in a light, or put in two lights, or there's nobody who's gonna say, oh, you can't do it because the traffic's gonna be too much. It doesn't work that way.
Well, I don't know how that, I know as a concept how that kind of plan plays out. I don't know how that's going to play out here. And the same thing with wetlands, whether they've properly delineated, whether they're going to be able to control stuff on site, that they don't increase the rate or volume, of water discharge from the property. Those are all things that they're going to need to address. There's going to be people who understand clearly what they're required to do and can participate and tell the state they're doing it wrong. If they issue the permit, those permits can be appealed, Army Corps can be appealed. So there's plenty of opportunities if you disagree with the professionals. But my thought is that PennDOT's going to have engineers, township engineers. They're going to have applicant using that ITE, International Traffic Engineering Manual, whatever. If you want to fight about that, you'll probably need an engineer who says that their engineer is wrong, or PennDOT engineer wrong, or township engineer is wrong, because if all the engineers looking at the same manual come to the same conclusion, then it's probably not going to be denied on that basis. There's a lot of requirements, and all we try to do, we're not trying to rewrite the SALDO, we were just trying to point out that board members had concerns about density, traffic, wetlands, resources, all that kind of stuff, but didn't feel that they had sufficient evidence to deny it based on any of those things. But looking at portions of the SALDO, saw clearly where those items, have hard objective criteria. What they need to get a stormwater permit from the township means that they need to get an NPDES permit from the state. If they're impacting wetlands, they need stuff from the Army Corps. If there's bog turtles, there's resource agencies, Game Commission. If there's flora and fauna, DCNR, Game Commission, all this stuff. So there's a lot of issues that need to be addressed that were all sort of way down the road from the board, simply looking, is multi-unit housing sort of jive with the surrounding uses, which are largely residential, some places higher density, that kind of stuff. That's the conclusion they made. I think that decision was made in accordance with the law, and there's an awful lot of concerns that may very well be valid, and a whole process where those concerns get reviewed, vetted.
Can I just say something? I was here at the planning and development meeting, And they reviewed over the Keystone Mobile Home Park being expanded. And honest to God, I mean, we're not done. You know, this is not done for us because they actually, you know, that developer had 10 pages of things that they had to, and they still didn't comply to them. And they turned them down, and they, you know what I mean? I still think we have hope.
I mean, for what that's worth, the prior iteration of this plan, Squared LLC, there was an applicant had a submission in, and the township did a preliminary review on it, and that they hadn't adequately addressed resources, you know, potential resources, and didn't show the wetlands. Looked to be, you know, a lot of concern. The supervisors indicated that they were opposed to the project. The planning commission indicated they were opposed to the project, and the applicant withdrew the project instead of having the zoning hearing that they had filed an application for. So, you know, and there is a time to review all that technical information. That time is after the applicant puts it down in paper with, you know, with all the component parts they need. And if they don't have all the component parts, then the engineer writes the multi-page review letter about the deficiencies and makes a recommendation that the planning commission not recommend approval, that the board of supervisors not approve. But that's, again, you guys wanted to like, get into that here, and I kept trying to, I think that's premature. There's a point to do all that.
So are you planning on forwarding on these meeting minutes then to the Board of Supervisors and the Planning Commission, or do we have to start from ground zero and educate each one of those committees on all of our concerns?
Well, I mean, copies of the minutes get submitted to the township, and the township administrative staff upload them. The decision, the same, whether planning commission members, board of supervisors review them, take the recommendations, study on it, I don't know. I would suspect you'd be prepared to present, you know, your concerns, and if they're like, we got you, you know, our engineer has that as point 7 in the review letter, well, you know, then you know it, and if not, then point out what you think the deficiency is.
On the plans that they had submitted, they had one point where they had X amount of ground that they considered wetlands. And then the second plan they submitted, they cut it in half and moved it somewhere else. Which ones did you guys look at? Was it the first one or the second?
Frankly, the board looked at them but didn't make any decisions about the merits of any of it.
Yes.
The decision specifically says that the board's not approving any specific density, any specific configuration, did not approve the application that was submitted, only approved multi-family housing units.
I don't think the board should have really had to worry about it if it went to the county, and the simple reason is, if you have a developer comes in and he takes and has, say, 10 acres here, it's wetlands, and then realizes, because of that, we can't get what we want, and we're gonna move it over there, and it was never on the plan over there, the judges are smart enough to see that. My parents, a number of years ago, sued a municipality for a gospel concert. They had it for 10 years. One of the supervisors got a bug up his kazoo and tried to stop it. First thing the judge said when it was in federal court was, why now? Why are you stopping now? So I think we don't have to look for the smoking gun, which a lot of times everybody looks for. It's the little things that is going to make a difference.
Well, I think to your point, if I understood you correctly, there was some discussion, and I think Mr. Rogers raised the issue about, you know, how did you calculate this density, and, well, you're taking some of the benefit from the property that was to have singles and duplexes, and again, instead of making a recommendation about approving any of that configuration, because again, I think that would be premature. To say 141's right, that fits, I don't think that was for the board of for the zoning hearing board to say that's the right number of units.
Yeah.
I think it's just sufficient to, they need to be able to say, we can build multi-unit housing because the zoning hearing board granted us relief. Now, here's our application, and we're going to meet our density requirement, and we combine these parcels, and we're going to get basically an offset where, you know, this piece will be more compacted because this piece would have allowed more units, and we're not doing that. And again, that's when you look at the plan, you know.
So they can't say, okay, because of X amount of wetlands here, and we were approved for it, we can put it over on the other tract. They can't go
Well,
there.
the issue with the wetlands is that nets out of the total acreage, and your density is not based on all the wetlands that you're, you know, can't interfere with.
I
in the first
understand. What I'm
place.
saying is, let's say the configuration's out, they can only do 75 houses there. They can't take the other 70 plus that they got approved for from the board, they want to put it over the other track.
Again,
They would have to,
I think the answer is yes, but I'm not, again, I don't want to preempt anything that the planning commission is approved.
With certain-
I was just gonna
I know, but what,
they can't move it to another part of the development because it's two separate parcels and they didn't.
well, they're gonna, but again, their explanation was valid, that they're allowed to combine parcels. They presented the agreements of sale on the two parcels that are at issue, and for purposes of submitting a plan, eventually it's gonna, if it moves forward and it's 100 singles and 100 townhomes, there's gonna be 200 deeds come out, you know what I mean? So they're gonna take 2 deeds and they're gonna make however many deeds come out if a plan gets
And
approved.
this is not to the board, but I'll talk to your other guys here. It might be best if you guys find out the owner of this property and the sales agreement, depends where it's written up. It might be written up that the owner can back out of it at any time he wants to. And if that's the case, just find somebody to buy it out.
In my opinion, the best opportunity you guys have is, the case that he presented for the wetlands is amazing, and are you certified, you can actually, you can,
In the state of Pennsylvania, you do not need to be a professional scientist to perform wetland delineations or forward them to the PADB or the Army Corps of Engineers. In the state of Pennsylvania, you do not have to be a PWS.
and you can do all that.
And you can do it.
Yeah, I would,
Well, he doesn't know.
I'm just saying,
He's saying
and you
know
don't
how.
have to, so I understand.
right, but I mean,
But I still do have the education and the background and the certificates.
because totally, in my opinion, that was not, how can you figure out what grows in February? I'm
You
a farmer.
can look for relics, but what the fact remains is that if the ground's frozen, you have a hard time. Something like skunk cabbage, everyone has recognized skunk cabbage just as easily as something like cattails. I'm just going to use a very well-known obligate, something that you visually can tell that's a wetland, you know it's very visible, all right? Skunk cabbage itself, the bulb is still existing when it's below the soil. How can you dig below the soil if the soil was frozen itself? So there might look like a vast, wide open field where nothing exists, or if you can find some dried up, crinkled leaves, but then again, we experienced a lot of snow this winter. We experienced a lot of freezing conditions. So we had a lot that was going against that as far as the wetland delineation.
Oh,
It was
absolutely.
a pretty shoddy wetland delineation. They even misspelled our township law.
For what it's worth, I think basically my recommendation was to disregard the wetland delineation.
That one that they did.
Right, but not because it's shoddy, just because it's not relevant. It's
That's
not
correct.
the same with the bog turtle studies.
They
You
did
know,
that only to fill the requirement to show to you guys that they're.
well, and again, I think no good deed goes unpunished. They wouldn't have had to have the preliminary study. They could have just had somebody say, you know, but we submit, you know, the Saldo, section 22, 620, whatever, requires a traffic study. We'll comply with that. That's going to require a scoping analysis and blah, 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 blah. All that letter did was have people, well, this isn't right. This is a preliminary study. This doesn't demonstrate, well, I agree with you. That doesn't demonstrate anything. But the testimony about there's a process and looking at the Saldo and there's a requirement, I just don't think that requirement is imposed now. So that's why the decision says what it says. Nobody's saying that anything you raised about wetlands issues and the like is not relevant, just premature. Yeah.
What is the benefit of going through this whole process and for this special dispensation to the township? Why couldn't they just compromise and give them the, you know, that one section, build the twins? I mean, how does this benefit if this all goes through? What's the township going to get out of it?
There's a lot of provisions in the ordinance that allow special exceptions. There's in the zoning ordinance. There's other things that will require conditional uses, and that would have had the board of supervisors conducting the same kind of hearing. There's provisions for variances, so they write a set of rules, the zoning ordinance, to address like general things, and then allow, you can have an exception, special exception, a conditional use, a variance, if you demonstrate compliance with things. So
You have an obligation to hear it. You can't
Yes,
just say,
absolutely.
you know, we're just going to compromise, we'll give you half,
I don't think,
and we're not going to go with it.
well, and again, the issue is that it's kicking the can down the road, but it's for the planning commission to look at the details of what the Saldo requires, to review their engineer's assessment of whether those requirements were met, to make recommendations to the planning commission, to the board of supervisors, for the board of supervisors to review the engineer's letter, the recommendations, and make decisions. All that information is submitted to those boards under the saldo with their obligation to review it, not the zoning hearing board. The zoning hearing board was just looking at, like, same type of thing about, should you be able to put your shed, 20 feet from the property line instead of 25 feet? Well, if you can demonstrate that your property is configured in such a way that you can't put it 25 feet because your house is here, there's trees you don't want to get rid of, or then the board can consider, okay, then that's, compromise, and 20 feet's good enough, and grant you a variance. And if the neighbor, who gets notice of it, like folks got notice their proximity, if the neighbor wants to come in and object, I don't want it, then that's something the board considers. If the neighbor doesn't show up, well, then presumably the neighbor doesn't object. So, again, that's probably a long way to try to answer the question, but there's strict requirements in the zoning ordinance, and then there's exceptions to it. This was an exception to allow multifamily instead of just singles and duplexes. And so they decided that they wanted that, and without hard criteria they met it or they didn't, the board engages in a subjective analysis, and then when you look at the saldo, has specific requirements to demonstrate those hard objective criteria. You need a traffic impact study.
So you're obligated to hear all that. You can't decide prior to saying like, no, we're not going to make it.
That would be prejudging things, and that would be wrong. You gotta wait till you get all.
This is segregation of power in all levels of government. So I'm not the legislative power, that's delegated to this group here. So we have the executive and legislative. We create the ordinances and we enforce them. We can't interpret them. That's why we have this separate board to ensure that it's compliant with what we put out there.
Yes, sir.
I've been to a lot of town meetings in my life. I've been to all of these, and like 4 or 5 of these, and every time I hear a lot of frustration here, a lot of frustration on your side. I need you guys, I hope you guys understand that the people that are getting frustrated here are getting frustrated because they don't understand the processes that you are very familiar with. And so there's going to be questions, there's going to be people who don't understand, there's going to be people asking the same thing over and over again. You've been very patient with 99% of us, which I appreciate.
Thank you.
But what
I haven't been, but it's nice of you to say. But
well,
I'm trying.
Here's my thing. As I'm listening to all these things, and I hear frustration here, I hear frustration there. There's not a lot of understanding going on. You're doing your best to try to explain it, but what I'm hearing from the group tonight, like I've heard every night, is that they don't want to be in this position again, where a builder comes in and because of some set of rules feels that they can do whatever they want, and we're all powerless to do anything about it. The 10 exceptions, they seemed, at least 4 of them seemed awfully broad. I'm hoping that after all this is said and done, no matter how this pans out, that people here who are in a position to do something about it are looking at it and saying, this needs to be tightened up in some way, shape, or form, because it is so broad. I don't see how you can ever exclude anybody. Anybody come up here and do whatever they want, as long as they give a cursory glance to 4 of those things that are so vague. Yeah, we promised to do this, we promised, but honestly, I don't want to go back to the environmental thing, but that was comical. And when Ware walks around and says, oh yeah, all right, the Bob he's hunting 24/7, 365, tell that crap to somebody else.
Right.
So what do we do and how do we get to a spot where we are not sitting here again 6 months from now, 12 months from now, 18 months from now, doing this thing over and over and over again and feeling like we don't have a say what goes on in our own town? How does that get tightened up?
I'll take a shot. I'll try to.
Because honestly, right now, for everybody who's up for election in this town, I want to vote for anything that this continues to go this way. I want to work against it.
I was going to say, do you want to run and deal with this? Try to figure out how to straighten the ordinance out? Because that's the alternative.
There's never committee who's going that beyond their committee.
No, seriously, if you got a better idea, it's funny because,
So what I'm saying, there's at least 4 things there.
Right.
That are so vague that even with a cursory effort from the builders, they can satisfy and move to the next step, which everybody in this room feels like, well, now it's fait complete, where it's going to happen. It just depends on now how big it's going to be. But it's still going to happen. It's not going to be a farm anymore. It's not going to be wetlands anymore. Something's going to happen. We've lost that. So how do we move from this to something where it's a little tighter?
Let me try a big I'm going to start off 30,000 foot view, and then I'll try my best to answer your question,
I
because
just
you were
have
complimentary.
I just have a question. As far as the zoning hearing board is, are you finished? Is this gonna be an open forum? I just wanted to make sure. because-
It's whatever,
Yeah.
it's whatever you want. I mean,
Yeah, no, I'm just-
I mean, typically, we haven't had a discussion after decision's announced.
Yeah.
The decision's announced, and that's the end of it.
Because I just want to say for the benefit of the board members, I mean, if you are done and you want to continue, in the discussion, but just fairness to the board, you completed what you needed to do. And, I'd be willing to answer some of these questions myself, so I'm just leaving it to you.
Oh, you're welcome to try that.
So, did you have an adjournment for a board, just,
Yeah, no, so I think once we approve the minutes, I think that,
Okay, so officially you're done.
that's it. So I think the upshot is that, first, the township needs to provide for all reasonable uses. So there's noxious uses people don't like, but you gotta provide for them. You can't exclude low-income housing. You can't exclude methadone clinic. Every municipality needs its fair share of things that not everybody likes, right? So that's the 30,000 foot view, high-density housing among them, right? And so you put that in particular zones. That might be in the urban zone, or that might be in the, R1, and then the R2, R3, or your more rural, ag, then you put it into mixed use. As a concept, that's how you're supposed to zone for things. To the specific question about the ordinance, we had this hearing because the ordinance allowed for a special exception for a bunch of things. One of them was, in their application, it was the section that dealt with multi-family housing. So if the Board of Supervisors didn't provide any zoning ordinance for a special exception for multi-unit, multi-family housing, there'd have been no application because there'd have been no, means of relief for that. And then in terms of how do you deal with what the text says, well, the Board of Supervisors can always review their comprehensive plan, their zoning ordinance, their subdivision land development ordinance, and consider changes based on growth or, needs of new technology that comes out, you know what I mean? So, like allowing mini cell towers and things that might not have been in the ordinance when it was written 15 years ago. Technology changes, you have to allow for it. And so every 5 years, you're supposed to redo your comprehensive plan. You're supposed to consider your comprehensive plan and update your zoning to sort of jive with what your comprehensive plan is, on like that 5-year forward-looking basis. So to address concerns, you express them to your elected officials. They give consideration along with, changes in the law, changes in population growth, changes in technology, and then change the zoning ordinance if that's what's appropriate. But that's the process.
You brought up a good point with the small cell tower. So I was made aware of the need for an ordinance there. The only reason is because I'm engaged with other people in other municipalities. We formed a COG. We can't live within the confines of Huntingburg Township. We're in a region. So what happened is, what I found out that if we didn't have a small cell tower ordinance, what happens, the way the state wrote the law was that they have the right to put a small cell tower in the right of way at their discretion. So it happened in Pittsburgh, where in Pittsburgh suburb, where a woman came out one morning and she saw her, they put this tower on the property, right on the right of way. And she said, so she went to the supervisors and they said, yeah, we support you. Turned out they couldn't because they didn't have an ordinance. So it took me 3 years just to convince my board that we have to put this in, because if we didn't have that, somebody came to you, Karen, put that in front of your property, and we don't have that ordinance, they could just leave it there. You would have a say in that, even if we supported you. Those are kind of the conditions that we're dealing with. So just have to throw that out to you. So, Sam, do you have a question?
I think what really frustrated everybody here is when the developer came in here and treated like we were stupid. And just let me finish.
Sure.
Like, if the developer was really sincere, they would have spent the money, instead of going to 322 traffic study, did all of roads. And then we say, okay, now you're looking at it. And then when they did, the big thing was the wetlands. Everybody's saying wetlands. Well, when you submit another plan, you got it somewhere else. And that was the thing that, I know they weren't required to do it, but I think if the developer would have came in and said, okay, we did the traffic study, and then sit there and tell us that, well, this development isn't going to affect the amount of cars on the roads. That's where the biggest problem was, and you guys can't control it. But when the developers come in and they come out in an area like this, and I think, I mean, that poor attorney at the last meeting, he didn't know what to do. And he was not as chipper as he was at the meeting before that. And that's what these developers gotta understand. You know, when they come out and want to do something, don't just do it half, you know what, you know, so you can eliminate a lot of stuff if you look more transparent. So everybody's gonna say, okay, well, now when they're gonna do their footers inspection, are they gonna have just a fly-by-night inspector to approve the footing and that kind of stuff? It just looks bad, and it wasn't your guys' fault. But if there's any way to send a signal to the future developers, when you come in here, you better have, you know, you got 4 exits going out of your thing that you're gonna do, that these people on this plot can use any 4 exits. You do all of them. Do a study and all. And I think that was the whole issue. If the developer would have been a little more upfront on things, it would have been half the problem.
I need to narrow you down to the answer, because I asked the question and I literally got a 3,000-word answer, so I want to make sure I understood it, okay? When I'm saying about these 4 points that we think are too vague, all of us know the points that we were talking about. Are you saying that what we need to do is go to the township supervisors and get them to change that?
Yes.
Okay, see, but that was not said. That was, we got all the way around here. I want to make sure I'm clear on everything. And
I probably bored you with the.
well, 3,000 words, but I got 20. I didn't need 3,000. And you came in and you started talking about radio powers. Okay, so listen, I'm trying to finish the damn question. I'm getting frustrated too. Because, so you're saying that. Are you also saying that by doing something like that, we could affect a positive change, that a developer can't just come in here and do what they want? Because that's the impression that we got here the last 2 months. A developer, as long as they did the bare minimum, they get to go to the next step. Is there a way that we can make that more difficult, and is it, you know,
Yeah, I mean, it could be the objective criteria, like this gentleman said, it could be, you have to have a traffic study, you have to have this, you have to have that, but there was things that clearly said, objectively, you need this is the density, you know,
But I hope you understood that we are not all crazy about high-density development. We're not against development, we don't, but when you're putting 400 units on essentially 80 acres,
So
you
if you
start
want to get
getting
more
concerned.
focused on what is the next step, how you can be effective and such. So we did have some community task force, community relations task force. We had maybe 12 people showed up. But those 12 people, they worked at it for 3-4 months, and they gave recommendations to the board of supervisors. And one of the things that they did was focus on the complaint process, which I was glad to get this community support on. I requested a complaint process, I got one, but it wasn't working. And that's what they pointed out to us, and we had to get it fixed.
Well, we have no
John, we already have our own community task force that we formed, and
Yes.
quite frankly, I wouldn't mind working with you guys on something like that, but, you know who I'm talking about. One of your board of supervisors needs to start acting like they're willing to work with the community and not be antagonistic at every single meeting and disrespect us.
You heard me before, I've said it several times, I point to, from up here, I point to the people in the audience and remind them, this is the boss, this is your boss out here.
That one
That's-
particular woman, and I will tell you at the last meeting,
Yeah.
she was laughing, rolling her eyes at the older gentleman who was speaking about his concerns about zoning, and she was looking at your township manager laughing about him.
Okay.
That was just
Absolutely.
unexcusable.
Do a
So I
recall
want to
on
be able,
those.
we want to be able to feel like we can work with you, but there has to be this
Well, the first step I took was to go over this land preservation document and get that going. The next round would be to have a discussion on zoning, so that just essential what that entails. And then you can take it to the next level and start picking apart what's in the zoning, what's not in it, and that way you can be more effective. I mean, we're willing to, well, at least I'm willing to step in here and provide that for you. But the thing is, we got to get that commitment going forward. I mean, looking at the land preservation program document. Take a look at the agricultural natural resource land prioritization map. That's a mouthful. Take a look at that stuff, yeah, and you'll see that what happened, that's
You got
not.
all the land preservation on one
Yes.
side, but nothing on this side.
So,
So,
the people that you're working with, we're working with, Brandywine Conservancy and all that, now I've raised some questions about whether we should reach out and bring in another land trust to work with, okay? So those are some of the questions that we have to raise. But if we hear your voice, I mean, I can tell you this, whenever I've sat at these meetings and board of supervisors, and it's an empty out there, the board just goes right through and say, oh, maybe we can get out of here in a half hour. But when you see people out here, then they start turning and say, who's that? What are they here for? It gets them a little concerned. That's the part that you gotta, I'm trying not to sound frustrating, but it's more than 3 people. You gotta have at least 2 votes to get something accomplished, okay? So don't alienate, and I don't think you're trying to, but the thing is, look at the board of supervisors for what they're trying to accomplish, because I've already spoke to Tim Hennessy about what we're doing here. He's the chairman of the Transportation Committee in Harrisburg, and he's just a phone call away from the regional director of PennDOT. And I've already reached out to him, and he's got my email. We've already discussed, and I'm saying this, repeating myself, but we had a discussion with Chester County Commissioner saying that 322 is already stressed out, and I talked to West Brandywine, they've got developments going up there, and if you take a look at West Nantville's zoning, they've got, residential construction that will be planned that's going to impact on Chestnut Tree Road. That's not going to be ignored by PennDOT, because they're going to take a look and say, okay, maybe you'll be able to get out of Hunterford Township, but you won't be able to get past West Brandywine, or you won't even be able to make it down to Guthrie'sville, because take a look at what's going on there right now.
Yeah.
I grew up with this in New Jersey. We didn't act in New Jersey. When I go back there, it's just gridlock. Come Sunday afternoon, if you're not on 35, you're never going to make it back to North Jersey.
I'm not worried about it. I'm worried about it.
Yeah, but no, that's the comparison I'm saying, is that what happened there is the same thing happened here. The development was all in Ocean County by the shore. Then when I first moved there as a kid, Jackson, New Jersey, there was nothing out there. Then a few years ago, a friend of mine said, you can't touch a home for $300,000. It moved west. Chester County is experiencing the same thing. Just look across the river and
Those are the
see.
same people that approve the traffic studies, They know it's gonna be gridlock and they approve it anyway.
Well,
Look at Exton, look at Malvern, look at
Morgantown.
322.
I mean, look at what it's like now with the traffic light at the bypass. There's times when, you're backed up over a mile.
Yeah.
And that's what we were experiencing.
And they have to
We
finish
need
the townhomes next to Proppers.
Yeah.
I just saw they started digging, at that one. No, well, up there too, but.
They done?
Things like
Yeah.
across
I got-
the
yeah.
place.
I'd like to answer that one word comment that he had made about how disgusted the audience is. I can guarantee whoever the most disgusted person in the audience is least disgusted than us 3. They need change. You guys are right. The problem with that being said is, we had to do what we had to do. Get it changed, and then wouldn't come to push, come to shove. Renee?
Is it a conflict of interest if the board of the Land and Zoning Board came to the meetings of the supervisors or the planning commission? Is that a conflict of interest?
I don't think that's conflict of interest, but the zoning hearing board doesn't make recommendations. The planning commission makes recommendations.
No, I
to the
understand that, but I'm saying as residents of Piney Brook Township,
For us to come to the meetings? No, we can do that.
And voice your concerns?
Sure. Yes, sir.
But I had, a number of years ago, had a chance to take, I think it was called Government 101.
Right.
The county puts it on. Would it be possible the supervisors be interested in putting the bill, get it advertised really good in the Tri-County or whatever, and bring in maybe a half a day or a day thing to let a lot of people understand how the local government works? I was very fortunate to go, and it was interesting. Maybe that's something the supervisors ought to look at, considering that, the development's coming this way. That people would understand maybe how to run for supervisors or how to volunteer to be on the board, that kind of stuff.
I just attended the PSAS, Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors Conference. A couple of weeks ago, I came in with a suit and tie and stuff from that conference. And what I spoke to Dave Sanko about, I said, look, you offer all this training, and you know, my first year, I did the same thing. I went for, even before I got on the board, I took that Government 101 training. It was a half day on a Saturday, but the thing is that I also followed up with taking a course on zoning and all that. The supervisors in town in Pennsylvania are not required.
That's the problem.
That's
the problem.
So laying out like, and I said, Dave, they throw this stuff at you, and you're in your first year, and you're just trying to figure things out. So I gave him an outline. I said, this is what a first-year supervisor needs to know to be effective in their first year. Then they build on that. So some supervisors could be on the job 3 or 4 years and still haven't gotten, the basics down.
What's required to get that changed? Can the state make it mandatory that if you're elected, you have to take certain courses? I mean, they do it for like a district justice is required to do it.
I mean, I'm sure some organization would be interested in coming up with some certification program for supervisors and conduct classes to maybe an idea out there.
Here's the big issue is when you have somebody sitting on the board and they're not familiar with it.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying anything against the engineers or the attorneys. I mean, Chip has been familiar with this area, but some of these municipalities bring lawyers and engineers up from Philly, and they come up here and they're used to dealing with Philly. And that's the issue where if you have, I mean, I know you gotta go with them for legal advice and stuff like that, but I had a situation in Paradise years ago. They were gonna develop this ground. The roadmaster was there. He was a supervisor. He had been a supervisor for 12 or 14 years. They were looking at this property, and one of the guys said, well, that's a pretty steep incline there, isn't it? And the other guy said, nah, I don't think so. And I said, can I come up and look at the print and show you guys something? And I actually had to show them the contour lines. I said, see, the closer they are, the steeper the elevation. The roadmaster looked at me, and he was chairman of the board, says, is that what these lines mean?
Yeah.
And that's a shame.
Well, I thought when I looked at this land preservation document, and we first came out, you remember back in 2006 when we first started this. So in 2007 we came up with the first version of this, and there was a map in here. The members of that land preservation committee, we all sat here at this table with all these maps and prioritizing all this. Then when we came out with the next edition, I opened it up. I said, wait a minute, where did some of these farms come from? They weren't on the original map. So the thing is, when it comes to the cost of that program, and this is what I just spoke about the other day about writing this next time around, is that how much does this program cost? And if you keep adding farms to it, and the supervisors weren't picking up on it, I ended up sat there and did map to map. And then I figured out the price and stuff. I said, we just added another $2 million to the program. And that's because our advisor, they said, oh, well, this goes in line with their purpose, the Brandon Wine Conservancy. These were farms that were by the creek that we never approved. So that's the oversight that we really, you got to get people that are interested in this. I was kidding around the other day when I did this presentation. I go, I'm probably the only guy that sits here reads things like TDRs and stuff like that.
Well, the other thing too is you can only preserve so much agriculture ground because you got to leave a certain amount for development. And if you use up a lot of your farms, you're going to get real density to satisfy the units. And so that you got to be careful with too, because I think some of these people would rather see an acre or 2 acre lot instead of 100 people on an acre lot.
Sure.
To meet it. So there's got to be a medium in there.
Well, Chestnut Tree Road is going to be a serious problem for us, and it already is. I mean, I'm approaching it in the morning, and I see the line of people waiting to get on to 322. In fact, that advertisement for Chestnut Ridge says it only takes you 2 minutes to get to 322. It doesn't tell you it's going to take you 15 minutes to get on to 322. But then you just go a little further down the road to 82. They already have a program, they already have a project approved by PennDOT. Within 2 to 3 years, they will be working on that intersection. We haven't even started, we don't even have projects submitted to PennDOT for that intersection, so we gotta get moving on that. That's one step, yes.
This is off topic, but do you know if anybody's studied the effect of the Amish community moving out of more eastward into Huntington Township? Like on Route 322, you know, it just scares me to death that the people moving into this area
Yeah.
don't realize the horses, you know, can swerve.
Yeah,
And I'm, you know, worried about those people getting killed.
yeah. My intersection is Route 10 and Beaver Dam Road. To me, that's one of the most dangerous intersections, and I've seen the remains of a carriage that was being hit by, because you're coming down a hill, it's on a curve, and, you know, and the same thing, you can't put a light there, because the trucks can't stop at a traffic light when they get the traction to get up the hill. There's a problem. There was a solution a few years ago, and it was to bypass Route 10 and put it over by the county line. But now it's all developed back there. We'd have to go into Maine to use that. That should have been done 20, 30 years ago.
I don't think we even have any more land to get developed. It's all been developed. You know.
Well, you see the map, you see the core of what we have on this end. That's the agriculture, and that's where we have the agriculture security district. The fringes is where the development is coming from. Well, it's up to them to start the process, and then they notify us. Yes.
Say that they were having this. They should have.